Hello and welcome to the review of the 2023 Monaco Grand Prix. Let's start off with the teams and begin with Red Bull. Max Verstappen qualified on pole after a great Sector 3 on his qualifying lap, but the same can't be said for his teammate Sergio Perez, who crashed in qualifying for the second year in a row. Once the race had begun, Max Verstappen got off to a great start and kept the lead until the end of the race. Sergio Perez pitted on lap 1 for hards after starting on mediums as they planned to go to the end on those tyres. And by lap 20, Max Verstappen had gapped 20 seconds to third place Esteban Ocon, which was a full pit stop in Monaco. On lap 30 of the 78 lap race, Red Bull reported rain at the end of the race, which turned out to be true, as on lap 50, the rain arrived. Sergio Perez was stuck behind slower cars throughout the race and his race got worse, as on lap 34 he made contact with the Aston Martin of Lance Stroll, which resulted in him breaking his front wing, which meant he had to pit for a new one. The rain arrived on lap 50, and it was at its worst at turn 3, and by lap 53 it had spread across the whole track. Max Verstappen hit the wall at the entry of turn 8, but luckily for him, there was no damage to his car. Sergio Perez was one of the only drivers to pit for full wet tyres, which turned out to be the wrong decision as he pitted later in the race for intermediate tyres. After this pit stop, Sergio Perez was now 2 laps down on his teammate Max Verstappen. Max Verstappen won the race by a comfortable margin and Sergio Perez finished P16. On to Aston Martin then, and Alonso narrowly missed out on pole position but still qualified on the front row in P2. Lance Stroll I think got damage to his floor in qualifying, which resulted in him qualifying P14. In the race then, Lance Stroll seemed to be playing bumper cars at a fairground as he seemed to make contact with everyone and everything. Firstly, on lap 1, Lance Stroll went for a move on Nico Hülkenberg that wasn't really there. Then, on lap 34, Lance Stroll made contact with Sergio Perez, which resulted in Sergio Perez needing to replace his front wing. On lap 41, Lance Stroll eventually got the black and white flag, but this didn't stop him, as on lap 46 he made contact with the other Haas of Kevin Magnussen. When the rain arrived, Lance Stroll was one of the first drivers to pit onto intermediate tyres on lap 53, but on lap 54, Aston Martin chose to put Alonso on the medium compound tyres. This turned out to be a completely wrong decision, as on lap 55 the following lap, Fernando Alonso pitted again for intermediate tyres. Once all the chaos had quietened down, it turned out that Fernando Alonso could have taken the lead if it wasn't for the extra pit stop he had to make. Around lap 60, Lance Stroll made one crash too many, as he hit the wall at turn 6, which got his front wing stuck under his car, and then hit the wall at turn 7, which dislodged the front wing from beneath the car. Lance Stroll also went straight on at turn 3 at some point in this, and then eventually Lance Stroll retired from the race. Fernando Alonso crossed the line second, which was his best result of the season, and Lance Stroll retired from the race around lap 60. On to Alpine, and what a weekend they had. Esteban Ocon lined up third on the grid, with his teammate Gasly in 7th. Ocon defended his P3 well after pressure from Carlos Sainz and then Lewis Hamilton throughout the race. Despite this pressure, Ocon came home to finish third, to take his first podium since his win in Hungary in 2021. Gasly finished a solid 7th, to score more valuable points for the Alpine team, who have had a difficult start to the season. Another team that had a good weekend was Mercedes. Lewis Hamilton started the race in P5, whereas his teammate George Russell started down in 8th. The two Mercedes drivers had a pretty quiet race until the rain arrived. After all the chaos, the two Brits found themselves ahead of the two Ferraris. Unfortunately for Russell, he spun, which potentially cost him a podium place. Regardless of this, Hamilton finished P4 and Russell finished just behind him in P5. George Russell also made contact with Sergio Perez, which resulted in him getting a 5-second time penalty for an unsafe rejoin. But luckily for Russell, he didn't lose any places as a result of the penalty. Next up is Ferrari, and their weekend seemed to get worse and worse. It all started after Charles Leclerc was dropped from 3rd on the grid to 6th after impeding Lando Norris in qualifying, but at least Norris didn't seem so bothered about it. Then on lap 11 of the race, Carlos Sainz broke part of his front wing on 3rd place Esteban Ocon after being told to push, and it only got worse when the rain arrived. Carlos Sainz spun, and to make matters worse for Ferrari, they were forced to double stack their drivers, which ruined Sainz's race further. In the end, Leclerc finished 6th, and Sainz finished down in 8th. McLaren also had a good weekend, as both their drivers finished in the points, as Lando Norris finished 9th and Oscar Piastri finished in 10th. Alfa Romeo narrowly missed out on the points as Valtteri Bottas finished 11th and Zhou Guanyu finished 13th. Nick de Vries also had his best result at AlphaTauri this season as he finished 12th, but his teammate Yuki Tsunoda had brake problems towards the end of the race as he dropped from 9th to 15th. Williams had a pretty quiet race, but the question is, what were Haas thinking? Haas kept Kevin Magnussen out on hard tyres when it was pouring with rain and everyone was on intermediate tyres and some even on full wet tyres. Kevin Magnussen hit the wall as he came into the pits to eventually change onto wet tyres, and towards the end of the race, they finally decided to retire his car. That's all the teams wrapped up, so let's move on to the top 3 things we learned from the Monaco Grand Prix. At number 3, I've gone with we learned what the top team's flaws look like, as Sergio Perez, Carlos Sainz and Lewis Hamilton crashed over the weekend, which allowed us to see beneath the car. The second thing we learned was that Sergio Perez may be out of the championship fight. This is because of his poor weekend, and also Sergio Perez is usually the king around street circuits, but this weekend may have shown his inconsistency, which may show that he's not championship winning material. And for number 1, I've gone with that McLaren certainly looked faster than the beginning of the season, which has brought them back to the top of the midfield. Let's move on to your thoughts. How this works is after every race you can tell me your thoughts on the race for me to discuss, and you can do this by submitting them on my Instagram story. The first one is shown on your screen now. It was a great race for Monaco, and I personally believe it showed why Monaco must remain on the Formula 1 calendar. The second response is shown on your screen now. The rain certainly did re-energise the race, and a wet street circuit will always be guaranteed action. Finally, let's move on to my predictions for the Spanish Grand Prix. How this works is I'll be predicting the top 3 drivers of the race, the surprise driver of the weekend, and predict who will DNF or do not finish the race. For the top 3, I have gone Max Verstappen P1, Fernando Alonso P2, and Lewis Hamilton P3. For the surprise driver, I've gone with Zhou Guanyu scoring points. And for the DNF prediction, I've gone with Carlos Sainz, as there's quite a lot of gravel traps at his home Grand Prix, so he'll probably end up in one of them. As this is my first review I've done, any feedback is appreciated in the comments below, and thank you for watching.